Good morning, everyone. Let's get into it. Everyone is talking sovereign AI, but there is little agreement on what it is. So that means we're heading into the India summit with an explosion of AI governance and a lot of division about how to conduct it. I'm Ryan Heath. I host AI Leadership Lab podcast for Weber Shandwick, and I have got an esteemed panel here, including Kat Duffy, who's Senior Fellow for Digital and Cyberspace Policy at the Council for Foreign Relations, Ambassador Pradhan, who is the Consul General of India here in New York, and Sarin, who's the co-founder and Chief Research Officer of AI Safety Asia. So welcome to all of you. I'm going to start with a tough one. Kat, you can go first. What is your one sentence or one paragraph answer to define sovereign AI?
I would say that sovereign AI is having agency in the way that you're deploying your AI. Not agents necessarily, but agency.
Well done. I can't believe you passed the test. Ambassador.
As a government representative, I would say sovereign AI would mean a country's ability to design, develop, and regulate its own AI systems using its own AI infrastructure, data, and workforce.
Mungkol.
Yeah, for me, I think sovereign AI is the sovereign capability, actually. It's the ability for the government to decide, verify, and govern these technologies. So for me, it's not about that every country will need to build a frontier model, right? For many countries, it's unrealistic. So it's the full stacks that they need to talk about, but it's in terms of capability to govern these technologies, not about building the best model, frontier model. It's how do you govern this deploy model?
Okay, so there's a lot of common ground there. They feel like reasonable definitions to me. Maybe something else I'd add into the mix for your reaction is I think a lot of smaller organizations or countries at some very basic level just want to make sure the US or China isn't going to cut off their access to AI services or AI data centers. Any reactions on that thought? And do you have any thoughts on what sovereign AI is not? Where is it unrealistic to think sovereign AI exists? Ambassador, maybe you can jump in.
Okay. I would say geopolitics is one that you mentioned, and we have real reasons to be, looking into that aspect. We have experience of global AI resources being restricted for various countries. So that is one factor. But when it comes to a country like India, I would say, we are talking about 1/6 of the human population, which is as diverse as it could be, and with very unique needs. So when I talk about my country and think about a sovereign AI strategy, I would say the requirement is to deploy AI to bring alignment into, let's say, 22 national languages, the different regulatory frameworks, the different cultural diversity that we have. And the objective is, of course, to use the transformational power of AI for inclusive development and global competitiveness, of course, without losing sight on the risks that it poses both for the society and for the people. And if you look at what we are doing in India, we are, of course, working on all the 5 layers of AI. And we have, going with the past experience of digital public infrastructure, I'm sure, what India is going for is, deployment of AI at a massive scale for population, and which should be kind of taking care of the unique requirement of people of India. So when I talk about sovereign AI, I'm sure that's going to be the approach of the countries, depending on their capabilities and resources. But not only geopolitics is the only factor. The unique requirements of the countries, particularly in Global South, would be playing a role.
That's a very important point. It's not just commercial business models that you're thinking about when you sort of define the sovereignty. Kat or Mungkol, any further thoughts there?
Well, I would say let's think about what sovereignty is not, right? Realistically, sovereignty won't be you have your own AI stack, soup to nuts, that only you produce that no one else touches. It's just not realistic, especially if you think of the AI stack literally as going from even minerals all the way up to software applications, right? So that's not going to be the world of sovereignty that we live in. Sovereignty is also not an excuse or a justification for moving away from human rights commitments. There are very real limitations that we have put on sovereigns all over the world for good reason, and they have committed to those limitations through their human rights commitments. And one of the things that concerns me about the digital sovereignty narrative is that it's one that was very much developed and pushed by China and then pushed out into the world. And it is not good for American companies either. It is not good for the United States. It is not good for democracies when we are not balancing a narrative of the development of sovereign AI with a comparative or with a competing narrative of that doesn't mean that everything is new, right? So one of the things that I find very concerning about the way that the US has pulled back from the international order, pulled back from our international commitments, and pulled back from where the US has traditionally been reliable on norms, is that I do think that that is creating a real feeling of being unsettled, not understanding the risk thresholds, not fully understanding where our government is sitting and where our government may exert pressure on companies, because we don't live, I would say, in precedented times, both domestically or in foreign affairs. And so this is something where I think when you think about diplomacy, you think about human rights, those things can all seem sort of soft and fuzzy at times, but a move away from that normative, from those normative agreements, and a move away from that international collaboration and an isolating of the United States away from those things is not a soft decision. It has very real ramifications. And on the hyperscalers, I'll close with this. I wrote a recent column about this in World Politics Review. When the US and the EU joined together on Russia sanctions back during, like right after the invasion of Ukraine, you saw the hyperscalers, the American hyperscalers, first do voluntary pulling back from Russia. And then you saw the US and the EU work together on sanctions over the next 2 years that forced the hyperscalers to stop operating in Russia. At the time, I think many people saw that as a real win for Western democracies, for a shared security alliance, for a shared strategy. But that was done with norms and relationships and alliances that had been long held and that were understood and that were also justified under international law. I do not believe that the same sensibility now pervades how other governments are looking at the United States in terms of how it might engage or how it might exert its influence over US companies. And so I think there's been a long-standing concern about dependency on the US tech stack, but I think that dependency is now being exacerbated by a feeling that there is a lack of dependency or trust that the US government will operate the way that it traditionally has in protecting the independence of its companies.
Mongkol, there's a big world beyond the US and China.
Yeah.
What does it
So
look like?
that's what I'm going to say. Build on what Kat was saying is that what we are not talking about is Asia and global South, right? Asia is 60% of the world. There's global South. So all of the things that we will discuss right now will be shaped by what's happening on the global South as well. It's not only from US-China geopolitical confrontation or with the EU, but a lot of things will happen in India, right? Massive country, in Indonesia that nobody's talk about. It's the fourth largest country in terms of population in the world, but nobody really talking about. Everything will be shaped over there. So we will need to pay attention and help them. If we want to make sure that everything is scalable, it needs to be careful in how these countries are shaping the norm and everything in their way of doing things. The other things, the second thing that I want to contribute is that there's a lot of things that we can learn from enterprise risk control management. Company like JP Morgan's, the medical sectors, there's a lot of compliance regulations that these companies need to abide by and conduct their due diligence and all of these things. These are some things that the government can learn from, actually. What I'm saying right now is that when we talk with all of this, when I go and talk with these leaders in the country, what we are trying to help them is in terms of getting this MVG, this minimum viable governance. That means procurement, in terms of evaluation, incident reporting, in terms of redress. So what are the minimum checklists that they can do in order to get this going? Because things are moving very fast and they need to start now. If not, it will be very late to redress all of these consequences that will be happening.
I think this is a very important point where I wonder where, at some level, are we getting it all wrong when we think about this only in terms of governmental or regulatory approaches to governance? Because it seems to be coming from all sides, and then some of the governments are hostile to regulation, which doesn't seem like it will stand up to the technology over time. That would have to shift at some point. Kat, do you want to kick us off replying to that thought?
I mean, the OECD right now is tracking, I think the latest time I looked, it was 2080, 2083, something like that, different AI governance initiatives globally, right? Just in the United States alone, in 2025, 1,208 different AI-related bills were introduced. 1,200, and that's just subnationally in the United States. And so I think, very much to your point, like where Asia is so interesting right now is also in the way that it's, and we're seeing this with India as well. Brazil is looking at this. The African Union is looking at this. Governance and regulation are not the same thing, right? So I tend to try to push people to think about governance with a small g. How are we coming together to think collectively about the way that we want this deployed, where power will sit, what benefits it will have, what benefits will accrue to whom, and how we do that at a societal level. And I personally, when I look at a global technology that has such potential, don't really want people going alone on that. I don't want companies to have to go alone. I don't want countries to have to go alone. I really do think that we need these spaces that governments can support creating to think through how we are going to learn together, how we're going to bake in some key principles across this technology globally. And so this is where I think a hostility to governance or a framing of governance as regulation is inherently sort of constraint, I think is a very myopic understanding of what governance can do in terms of creating incentive structures, creating spaces for collaboration, creating spaces for threat intelligence sharing, right? All of these other areas. And so I hope that we can be expansive when, or at least I guess maybe we say on this panel, when we're saying governance, probably none of us is saying regulation as those being the same words.
Open-minded about governance, but maybe not endless governance options. Ambassador, obviously the AI Summit in India is an opportunity for a meeting of minds and sharing of practices. So what sort of convergence amongst the different approaches to governance are you hoping might come out of the summit, or that you're actively engineering to come out of the summit?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. But to give you a scale, I think the CEO of Partnership on AI mentioned that it's going to be the biggest AI event. But that would be kind of an understatement to say the scale that you are going to see next week. It's going to be 300,000 people, participants who are going to participate there. There will be 600 sessions, different panel discussions. We have 21 heads of state and government participating there. We have 5 international organizations, including the UN Secretary General there, 50 ministers, more than 100 countries participating, 500 AI startups, well-known startups, they're coming. We have civil society. I'll give you one sample, the United States delegation. 1,300 people going from this country, 250 plus NGOs, 51 universities. So that's the kind of diversity of participants. So it's not only government or civil society or AI startups, people from all the spectrum who are relevant for AI, they're participating there. So now, of course, there are very well-known standpoints on AI governance. You mentioned a few of them. But like my friend mentioned, the world is beyond those 3-4 frameworks. There are other countries who are having their own AI governance frameworks coming up at different stages. Now, in India particularly, we believe in a light touch governance model, which is to promote innovation, not stifling innovation while you are thinking about regulations, not to overburden innovation with multiple compliances. But that is not to say that we will be losing sight from the risk and the ethics aspect of AI. What you are going to see in India next week is divergent viewpoints being discussed and a sincere effort to bring a convergence in that. And I'll give you one example. in the run-up to this summit, we created 6 working groups, consulted more than 100 countries from the global south to take their viewpoint as to what they expect from the AI Impact Summit, what they have their concerns about the impact, the accessibility, the safety and other aspect. So taking the views of the global south, having extensive
Was anything that surprised you in that feedback? What are you taking on board from it?
I would say, before coming to New York, I was working as ambassador in Africa in a country called Tanzania. I can give you one experience that since 2022, every country, and you meet any literate guy, he's talking about AI and the impact of AI, not only in his life, but in the society and the government. So every country is bothered about that. In fact, India created one engineering institute in Tanzania. And the first course we offered was data science and artificial intelligence. That was the first course that they demanded in 2022. So I would say the whole world is talking about AI and they have their own concerns. From the global south, I would say the concern is about the accessibility, deployability of AI, and the link between resource deployment to have access to AI. So that is a main concern that we came out with. I'm sure next week you'll be hearing more about that. But the attempt in Delhi would be to find a common working ground on the different governance models with a focus on all the 3. Impact, which Ms. Rebecca was talking about, the expectation from AI that it's going to increase your productivity, it's going to be a multiplier for growth and economic activities. So that is going to be there. But there would also be discussion about accessibility, how the global south would not be left behind. And there would also be discussion about the safety aspect, to talk not only about the ethics, but also the other safety aspects involved in that.
Speaking of safety, it's a good moment to bring you back in, Mongkol. I grew up in Australia, so what I would call a middle power country, and I know you focus on the space that those countries might be able to occupy, how they might be able to shape the sovereignty debate. What role do you see those middle powers playing, whether in India or beyond?
Yeah. For example, one of the regions that we are focusing on from my organization is ASEAN. It's the Association of Southeast Asian. It's 11 countries, 700 million people in the regions. So we see the role of ASEAN as a middle power, right? To maybe shaping something that is neutral. Right now, there is geopolitics between China and the US, but what can middle power bring about in terms of these changes? Maybe some neutral understanding of what does that mean in terms of governed AI, sovereign AI, and trying to shape that without any emotional confrontation between the 2 powers over there. So that's what we want to do. For us, safety, for example, it's really a live experience because people in the global south experience AI not in terms of development of this system, but in terms of the deployment, what they get out of this deployment over there, right? Their live experience that affecting education, finance, health, and all of these that's already been deployed and being used by the citizen. For example, the Philippines, one of the countries in ASEAN, 9 to 10% of their GDP is based on BPO, this business process outsourcing, the like of the call center, the medical assistant, executive assistant, and all of these things. And it will be impacted significantly by AI. And do we have enough mechanism to help people to transition with AI? The answer is not. So we need to think a little bit more on that front.
Maybe to get, I don't know if it's the geopolitics, but it's certainly the differences between some of the approaches from the major powers now. I always think in terms of like, what interest is the approach protecting? So if you think about the EU, it's a risk-based approach. It's trying to protect sort of individuals and their privacy and their safety. In the US, it's very much if US companies are allowed to do what they can and want, then America will succeed. So it's kind of protecting the companies at some level or the providers. China, it's about protecting state power often, but building trust by having a tight grip on what AI is allowed to be out there in the world. how do you weigh up the differences between those systems, and what other systems am I not thinking about that are major contributors to the debate? For example, India. Basically, give me some of the pros and cons of these different approaches.
I mean, I think one of my greatest concerns is in a technological transformation that is so heavily private sector led, there are real concerns about everything that will be lost because it won't be revenue generating, because it is not a large enough market to make sense for private sector investment. When you think about the number of minority languages sitting across Southeast Asia, when you think about how India is trying to both serve all of its citizens, but is looking at something like 90% of the digital content that exists is in Hindi, it becomes very hard to make sure that AI systems are equitably serving people who speak Tamil or Malayalam, right? So, and many of the engineering practices that you would want or need to support the protection, for example, of minority cultures or of smaller languages in either Asia or in India, it's going to be the same in Africa. It's going to be the same potentially with indigenous languages in Latin America. So there are spaces where I think there are common and collective interests. There is not common or collective funding, resourcing, or market drivers. And I think this is something we really need to grapple with as a society. And I think it's also, frankly, something that the private sector will need to grapple with in terms of, not that it's responsible for sort of handling all of the sort of financing and resourcing of that, but as that scales, what sort of world are we looking at? And is that a good world for business operations? And I'm not convinced it would be, actually.
Okay. I think it's now time for some closing thoughts from you, Ambassador.
I would say, if you look at the history of the AI Impact Summits, the first one in 2023 was focused on AI safety. But since then, the whole definition of safety is getting expanded, getting broadened. And I think the very nature of AI technology, it's such that this debate would keep evolving. The debate about the governance of AI is also going to undergo several changes. But I think countries would have a debate between the impact of AI and the safety aspect. And when it comes to developing countries in Global South, you will find that the focus would be singularly towards using AI for inclusive development, while these societies and the governments would also be dealing with the safety aspect. So I'm sure you are going to get a reflection of that in the India AI Summit next week.
And on that point, actually, I mean, I know it's a lot to ask a 300,000 person summit to come up with a single communique or a single output. But what are you hoping to walk away from with the summit beyond that communique?
I know that we are working on a joint statement which would be issued after the AI Impact Summit. And they are working with all stakeholders, not only the countries who are participating, but also they are taking the civil society, the startup community, the innovation community into confidence. I think what we are going to see on 20th is going to be a joint statement which would be forward-looking, would be touching upon all aspects of AI.
So I've got some good news. We do have 5 more minutes to the panel, so I don't need to shut it down. But Mungkol, do you want to pick up where the ambassador left off?
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I'm worried about is that, as Kat mentioned earlier, there's a lot of regulation, there's a lot of laws, and in different country, variety of them. How do people navigate? It's really difficult. So interoperability is something that I think top of mind for me. How do we make sure that these countries can work together? There is a norm, the kind of a standards that people can rely on and that industry can scale, because that is a big hurdle in terms of scaling. The use cases, scaling the technologies and whatnot, if there is no kind of interoperable platform or frameworks to work across countries.
Now it's time to bring all of you into the discussion quickly before Mr. Diamond arrives, and I know you are keenly awaiting him. So we've got a microphone at the back. Yeah, we've got a question here, and if you could say if you're representing somebody, and if you're addressing the question to a particular person, just let us know that.
My name is Heath, CEO of Paradigm Networks from Silicon Valley. We are a venture-funded company. So on sovereign AI, there's a very interesting dynamics that is developing. So in the last 6 years, we were on the cloud journey, which means that it was shared services. So everybody all over the world got the same AWS or Azure or whatever cloud they were using. But now in sovereign AI, people are saying, look, I want to deploy this in my environment. I want it for my country. I want it for my company. And I don't want you to even look at it, right? So we in the tech world are being asked to develop on-premises services that our customers will use, and we will have no ability to touch them. My question is, how do you see the effect of sovereign AI on the tech companies, on how they'll be able to support these customers in a open way, but yet be under pressure to develop these things that are more sovereign rather than more shared?
How to be open and sovereign at the same time. Does anyone
that's the challenge
want to take a stab at that?
Getting now.
I mean, I would say I think you're seeing it. It's not just sort of on-prem. You're also seeing requirements for registered officers locally. You're seeing a greater push for technology companies to have a local presence. So we're seeing this across a lot of global environments. And you look at like Walmart, for example, right? Walmart's financial services or payment services company in India is now its own company in India with its own board and its own sort of set of governance. So I wonder if we are moving into an era where we're actually going to have less of a giant sort of multinational that is all held in one sort of company, and instead a sort of consolidation or satellite universe of different companies located in different areas operating with the same sort of technology but doing it in a more localized fashion. I'm not saying whether I think that's good or bad. I just think that may be the direction that we are heading, and so you will see shared technological approaches but not necessarily the same sort of seamless infrastructure. But it gets really tricky when you start talking about the core components of connectivity, right? So when you start talking about like 70%, I think, of African fiber is from Huawei, right? So I think that's the number. I could be wrong. So when you start talking about the deeper you go in the stack in terms of like where that connectivity is sitting, what the pipelines are, who the CDNs are, right? Like that's where I think it gets really thorny, because it is very hard to break that off. So then I think it's probably more about controls and legal accountability.
I think we are now going to have to wrap it up. Is there any ultra urgent one-sentence thought to add here?
I think we have to go back to the definition of sovereignty. What does it mean? I think a leader needs to understand what sovereignty means. Sometimes, for example, when you mention about open model, open weight doesn't mean sovereignty. And building on premise also doesn't mean sovereignty. So we leader will need to educate themselves. What is sovereignty? What do they want for their products and platform and services and business?
There you go. Know what you want out of governance, or you will not get it. I want to thank all of our panelists.